having met him at the Palace, the first bloggers Christmas party, that attorney Harry Roque, I got to meet Harry Roque then. You know, since that time I've really been deeply affected and troubled by what happened to the former president. During the Duterte administration, I was one of the unofficial bloggers. You know, walang bad, I wasn't paid. I just cared about what was happening in the country. I just cared about the improvements that had happened since President Duterte was in office. I was also invited by ASEC Mokaruson to the Build program of the Duterte administration. And I remember clearly hearing about all the magnificent structures that were being built, you know, roads, railways. And I remember also there was a massive focus on Mindanao, which I think is so important. And it's lovely to see that President Duterte was the first president from Mindanao and of course from Davao. Why am I here today? You know, my wife is a Filipina from Pangasinan. We've been married 26 years, but the Philippines has always been in my heart, and the Filipino people have always been very close to my heart. As I've said previously, I think the world will be a very dark place without the Filipino people, and I'd like to thank all the OFWs around the world for being here. I'm not going to make this political. You know, I'm a foreigner and I don't have any right to be critical of the government. But all I would say is this. You know, President Duterte was very clear that he loved the country. Yes. You know, he said he loved the Filipino people. I remember his first Christmas speech when he said about, you know, a message to criminals, etc. This will be your last Merry Christmas. And all I think he was doing was warning people to behave. You know, I've seen a documentary on the effects of shabu or crystal meth, and I know it can completely change people and make people very aggressive. And I know when people are under the influence of shabu, you know, they're committing rapes, murders, really, really nasty crimes. And all the former president wanted to do was rid the Philippines of this nasty, nasty drug. I remember again during the Duterte administration, I was basically posting information from the Philippine National Police on the amount of drug dens that were shut down, the amount of shabu that was taken off the streets. And I know that the Philippines became safer under Duterte administration. Yes. I first started visiting the Philippines about 30 years ago. I've been back home to Filipinas about 70 times. And I have to say I've seen massive improvements under the administration of the former president. Again, I'm not here to be political, but I remember on March the 6th, the day that the president was taken to the ICC, I don't normally wake up in the middle of the night, but I woke up about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was watching Facebook, and I saw the videos, and I saw Mam Hanilet, and I saw Mam Kitty, you know, and everyone was having to see what happened. You know, President Duterte was like a father to so many people, so many Filipinos. Yes. And I saw the turmoil that his family were going through. You know, former President Duterte didn't have a chance. You know, the Philippines is a sovereign nation. It has its own judiciary, its own court system. You know, May Kian de los Santos, rest in peace, but he was the people behind that were prosecuted within the Philippines. So it just goes to show there is a functioning court system in the Philippines. So in that case, why were these cases not dealt with in the Philippines? Why did it need to go to the ICC? Why was President Duterte, a man who's 80 years old, a man with multiple medical conditions, who at the time was suffering a diabetic hypo, why was he dragged onto a plane and brought thousands of miles away? I remember during the Duterte administration, you know, the former president didn't really want to travel so far because of his advancing age. So why was he 80 years old? Why was he flown thousands of miles, you know, to put on a small plane, flown thousands of miles for this? And you know what? When he was flown to The Hague, to the ICC, he had a 25-minute court appearance, and apparently all that court appearance was so that they could make sure they got the right person. I understand about the wheels of justice, but wouldn't it have been far better, as President Duterte said himself, you know, he wants an investigation. He accepts there are questions to be answered, but why weren't the ICC able to do something before they brought him? Why couldn't they at least wait until everything was ready? Because I worry, I get really scared that this trial is going to take a long time. It's a very lengthy procedure. And you know, I have to say one more thing. You know, there's no death penalty in Europe. There's no death penalty in the ICC. And I hate to say this, but what scares me the most is if this case goes on for a longer time. I hope former President Duterte lives for 1,000 years. I hope he does. But I do worry the more he languishes in jail, the more it's going to affect his mental health. And I'm so scared about that. I've been in absolute turmoil for the last month. I've been waking up in the middle of the night. I haven't been sleeping. This is my 3rd visit now to the Hague in the last 3 weeks. I cannot keep away from showing my support. I'd like to thank Sir Alvin and Sir Aldo. And I'd like to say, you know, outside the detention centre, there's a piece of grass there that they call Duterte Park. Please tell all your friends, please tell all your family, let's be there in solidarity.
Yes.
I know we can't go inside, but what we can do is we can be there for the former president. We can eat pancit, we can eat cakes, we can celebrate his birthday. You know, let's show the world, let's show the ICC, let's show the international community how much we love the former president. Please, Ma'am Hanilet, please can you send my love to the former president? I just ask you that, you know, if you're able to. Please tell him that I'm thinking about him. You know, I got to meet him back in 2017 at the Malacanang Palace. And I remember as soon as he came in, he came straight up to me. And he said, before I do anything else, I'd like to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas. He shook my hand. This is a person that the international biased media are calling a murderer. They're calling a tyrant. They're saying all these things. But we had a lovely conversation and he was a humble man. Again, I'm not saying there aren't questions to answer. I can't talk about the case. I'm not a lawyer. All I am is a British national who was personally had that respect and that friendship with the former president. And I'm standing here to say today to say that I care deeply about him. And I hope the ICC is listening. How can a man who's supposed to be a tyrant be loved by so many Filipinos across the world? I have to be honest, over the last 2 weeks, I've had 100 million views on my Facebook. There's 110 million Filipinos, meaning to say almost every Filipino across the world. I've got messages from people in Iceland, in Greenland, in all around the world celebrating his birthday. People have spent their own money. None of you guys are paid. People have spent their own money to be here to show their love for the former president.
Yes.
Let's continue. Let's pray for the former president. Let's send him cards. Let's send him letters. Let's show him that we love him and that we care for him. Thank you so much to every single one of you who's been here today. Thank you to Euro Pinoy Media Network for allowing me to be here today. Thank you so much to everyone, my dear friend Senator Robin, you know, Senator Bongo, and everyone here and everyone watching in the Philippines, and to my family. You know, I love you guys, and to my asawa, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Maraming salamat po. Mabuhay Filipinas. Mabuhay Tatay Digong.
Buhay, Tatay Digong.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you imagine that the former President Rodrigo Roa Duterte has affected a British national's feelings? What more for us Filipinos?
Yes.
I think that that is a very strong message, no? Na talagang it should resonate to everybody. And indeed, I agree, hanggang sa dulo ang laban natin. Huwag tayong tumigil hanggat hindi makalabas si Tatay Digong. Exactly. Pero ngayon po guys, I would like to ask Ma'am Hanilet to give us a message, and I hope that wag muna tayo magmaritisan dyan sa kilid. Makinig muna tayo dito kasi baka nakalimutan natin ang purpose dito is to mark this is a very significant day the 30th day of the detention of the former president. You can marites tomorrow or some other day, but please not today.
Later, that can.
If you're here, be here because there's so many people all over the world who wants to be here.
Yes.
Pero hindi sila makapunta. So please respect the sanctity, the significance of this moment. Bukas na kayo magmarites.